Honestly, I don't dislike the guy. Everyone says I must dislike. I don't dislike the guy. I'm sad about what he is and what the culture has become to connect him into the most important job that we have in our country, if not the world. I'm just a little sad about it. And your book is so insightful because it provides a perspective of how this happened in our culture and how this happened in our society. Okay, so joining us now on Open Book is Ramin Setoodeh. He's the co-editor of Variety, and he's also a best-selling author. His latest book, Apprentice in Wonderland, How Donald Trump and Mark Burnett Took America Through the Looking Glass. Ramin, it's great to have you on the show. I have so much to talk about because, I know Donald Trump. I know Mark Burnett. I'm friends with Jeff Zucker. Everybody, I mean, you got all the characters in here. It could be a Netflix special. I'm wondering if you're going to actually go in that direction. But let's go to you. How'd you get into this business? How'd you get to be a journalist? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm a huge fan of the podcast. The only thing I've ever wanted to be is a writer. Ever since I was in grade school, I would always say I wanted to be an author. I wanted to be a writer. And I got into journalism very young. I was in junior high school. I became the editor-in-chief of my junior high school newspaper. I became editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper, college newspaper. And then in my early 20s, I got a job at Newsweek as a writer. And I was really trying to establish myself, create a beat, have something that I could write about regularly. And this was in 2004 when I started at Newsweek, and The Apprentice was the biggest show on TV then. It was the hottest show. People loved it. A lot of my friends who were in their 20s saw it as very aspirational because Donald Trump was trying to find the next great business leader, and it allegedly taught you about business, and you would go into the boardroom and you'd learn about how to navigate these tasks that he would give you. And it was really smart reality TV. It wasn't like Fear Factor or Survivor or some of the other shows that felt like it was just luck. And so I started writing about the show, and I started realizing that I could call Donald Trump anytime I wanted and get him to comment on anything I wanted because he was always available. So he didn't have a publicist. I would call Trump Tower. His secretary, Norma, would patch me straight through to Donald Trump. I talked to him on the weekend. He was going to marry Melania. He took the call from the golf course. We talked for like 2 minutes. And he didn't really care where I was from or who I was. He didn't necessarily associate me with any specific publication. He just would take the call from the journalist, give the journalist 3 quotes, and then hang up. And so that's really how I began covering The Apprentice, and also how I began my journalism career in 2004.
Okay, so we've had similar experiences with him, and so I'll just share mine briefly. I was at NBC, as a CNBC paid marketing contributor. He was at NBC, he used to invite me to all of his parties. Apprentice had a launch party, I went. Apprentice had a finale party. I went to Yankee games with him. Used to hang out with him and Regis Philbin. When I went on my first date with my wife, I was at a Yankee game, and I ran into him. I said, well, I'm on my first date with this woman. Do you think it's going to work? And Trump looked at me and said, it's definitely going to work. You're just good looking enough for her. It's fairly fucking funny, I thought, and I laughed about it. Okay.
Yeah.
And I always got on with him. And so it sounds like you got on with him as well, but there's something amiss in his personality. You write about it in the book. So what is it, Ramin?
So there is. And I think the thing that was so jarring for me, because we obviously reconnected for this book years later after he left the White House. And what was so jarring for me is that I did think becoming president of the United States had to inevitably change him, right? He had to be different, but he's the same exact person he always was on the show and as a media fixture, which is he's this kind of silly, goofy guy that became a reality star, wants to be around famous people, has a very funny sense of humor when he wants, but also isn't that interested or invested in actually doing the hard work necessary to get from point A to point B, right? So he's always just interested in himself, talking about himself, saying the bombastic thing that gets attention, getting as much media attention as possible. But he conducts himself like an actor, playing Donald Trump on a reality show. And I think that's the thing that people need to really focus on in this upcoming election, because we lived through 4 years of the Trump presidency. We know what 4 years of Trump presidency is like, and we saw a glimpse of that. We're doing this podcast on the day after the Republican National Convention speech that he gave. And so we saw the real Donald Trump kind of creep out in the speech, where he just wants to tell stories, entertain people, rambles, doesn't really have a train of thought. And those are the things that are missing. He's not actually a leader. He just plays one on TV.
Well, I mean, it's more dangerous than that, though, too, in my mind. Because remember, I was in the White House
Of
again,
course.
11 days, but I was on the campaign for 9 months. The intellectual vacuousness
Yeah.
is astonishing, and I would say this. I want you to react. Despite his success, and he is a very successful man, and he's obviously been the president of the United States, maybe the president of the United States again. There is a general sadness and insecurity to him. And so, do you believe that? Did you see that? Because I certainly saw that. And I'm just wondering what that's about in your mind.
Oh, absolutely. Because I think that he's incredibly insecure. And I write about in the book how a lot of our time is spent with him fixating and thinking about all the celebrities who liked him when he was host of The Apprentice and then didn't like him when he was president. Right. So he's upset that one time he invited Bette Midler to his apartment for dinner, but as president, she tweeted negative things about him. He's upset that Deborah Messing one time came up to him at the NBC upfronts and said something nice to him, but as president, she wasn't a supporter of his. He's upset that Kim Kardashian was invited to the White House to talk about prison reform. And then when Joe Biden won in 2020, she posted on Instagram 3 hearts. And so this is all the behavior of an incredibly insecure person. But I also think if you go through the roots and the origins of show business, I write in the book that he's essentially an insecure actor that just wants people's attention and approval. And that insecurity creeps up in a lot of his decision making. And he does a lot of things to win the approval of the people that are in his inner circle or the people that he thinks he needs to impress to feel better about himself.
So, is that a good trait for a president of the United States? So if like someone like H.R. McMaster is trying to tell you the difference between a Shia and a Sunni, you don't know, so you're unbelievably insecure. So now you're going to start bullying H.R. McMaster and demeaning him, and you don't want other people to know that you don't know. Is that a good trait?
I mean, no, obviously not. But I also think looking through the lens of Donald Trump as a reality star, he had a safety net, right? He was always able, if he made a decision, there were editors, there were Mark Burnett's producers, they could steer the image of Donald Trump in the right direction. And so the Donald Trump that many Americans think they know is a mirage. And the Donald Trump you are describing, and a lot of other political reporters have described, is the real Donald Trump. But I also think it's very, very important in the discussion of Donald Trump to clarify and to continue to remind people that he is a product of reality TV television, because a lot of his base and a lot of voters that aren't really paying attention to the reporting that came out of the White House or has forgotten the reporting that came out of the White House need to realize who Donald Trump really is.
So, I mean, that's the you're basically asking my next question is, why are these people still clinging to him based on that reporting?
I think that people like him because he represents something in America that allows people to feel better about themselves, right? Here's a guy who tries to be funny, who was the boss of the boardroom, who seems to be on TV at least interested in the little guy, even though he's really not. And he has this relatable quality as a reality star that makes people feel there's something comforting about that. I know to millions of Americans, they're terrified of him, but to his base and to his supporters, the character he played on The Apprentice did represent comfort, because it was essentially what people who aren't rich think rich people are like, right? Bombastic, over the top, lives in this gold encased penthouse apartment with his beautiful wife and kids. And so I think that people are looking at him in a very surface way, and his voters see this surface image of Donald Trump. But what I was trying to do in my book is really take you beyond the surface and show you who he really is, which is someone you observed when you spent time with him. And the real Donald Trump is obviously very different and a very frightening figure.
Well, let's talk about that. So let's talk about the real Donald Trump. Paint the portrait, and also I want you to fill in the color by numbers, because we're talking about the mental deficits of Joe Biden, but in your book, you are writing very graphically about the mental deficits of Donald Trump. So paint the picture of who Donald Trump is outside of the prism of reality television.
In the time we spent together, he didn't remember the chronology of events. He couldn't remember me between our first and second meeting, which were only a few months apart. He didn't seem to remember a lot of his accomplishments in the White House. He didn't seem to be that interested in a lot of his accomplishments in the White House. He was approaching life and remembering life as an entertainer. So he was excited when he talked about The Apprentice. He was very excited when he talked about ratings, which led to his fixation on crowd size. What I learned in the book was that Jeff Zucker primed him to really look at the ratings because this was a measure of success. And so every day after the show aired, he would look at the ratings. He would fax the ratings to other executives with his signature. He saw it as a measure of success. And so I think that insecurity led to him wanting affirmation. And that is why he's so obsessed with crowd size. That is why he's so obsessed with ratings. But the real Donald Trump is a man who's playing a character who we're all talking about. And he loves the attention. He loves the press. He loves the buzz about him. And he doesn't believe there's any such thing as bad publicity. He just wants to be in the conversation, and he wants the spotlight. He wants the big Trump and neon lights. And that is really the way in which he operates. That is the way in which he views, quote, governing.
You know, it's interesting because everything you're saying I experienced. And I guess the thing that I'm worried about is, how did he do it again? Okay, so he fooled the public, got in office, fooled guys like me. I thought he was going to be way more moderate. I thought he was going to be way more attentive, more serious. He has just a lot of superficiality. There are two things he likes. He likes attention and he likes money. And when he was on the top half of the folded papers like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, we go on the campaign plane, he'd say, you know, I could never get on the top half of this as frequently as I am. If I was, I mean, maybe the last time I was on the top half was when I filed for bankruptcy, but now every day I'm on the top half. Look how great this is. And I remember thinking, is that why we're doing this? Is, you know, I mean, well, aren't we doing this to serve the people? Aren't we doing this to try to make the country better? But there's really none of that, you know. And I guess why isn't that resonating with people? Why can't people see through that? Is what I'm trying to understand. I mean, again, I got fooled, so I'm not suggesting that there isn't really good protective armor there. But we've now had 4 years and now 8 years of this exposition of him, and it looks like he could win again, Ramin. So go ahead.
It does. And I think this is about cultural awareness and being able to speak about Donald Trump in language that people can understand. And I think there's so much reporting about him and there's so much information about him that a lot of people are tuning out. And I think that you have to look at him, going back to the thesis of what I'm arguing. If you look at him as a reality star, you know that in our culture, reality stars are in a lot of ways unstoppable. And there's always this opportunity and possibility for redemption. And so, yes, he's been impeached twice. Yes, he's a felon. Yes, there's many other legal cases that we're waiting for clarity on, but he is on his comeback tour, and people have forgotten how scary it was when he was president during COVID. And the Biden presidency, I think, has been, if you're looking at it in terms of entertainment, maybe safe and slightly boring, which are all good things. As citizens of the United States, we want a leader who isn't necessarily on our TV screens every single day or interested in only making news about himself. But I think that people have forgotten what it was like, and they're looking for excitement. And our attention spans are so short. We're constantly looking at videos and social media, and there's so much information coming at us that I think people like him because they want to be entertained by him. And he talks about Hannibal Lecter and sharks and things that don't even make sense, but it doesn't matter because he's on every screen and people can't escape him. Yeah. And that is why I think he's surging in the polls.
So he told you, I mean, again, you're reporting this in the book, and I believe it, but it sounds so unbelievable, Ramin. You know, This is another problem. It's so nutty. People are like, okay, that's got to be BS. It can't be true, right? I mean, so he tells you in the book that Joan Rivers voted for him. Of course, she died 2 years prior to the election. He says, hey, I got to go upstairs and handle something related to Afghanistan. He's no longer president, so what is he handling related to, unless he's a spy for Vladimir Putin or something like that, and he's obviously going to give Putin some advice, or he's talking to the Taliban. Tell me what's going on there. What am I missing?
So I think for me, the Joan Rivers thing was him obviously just not remembering the chronology of events and speaks to his memory. But when I was talking to him, we were watching clips of The Apprentice together one day in Trump Tower, and he said he had to go upstairs to deal with, quote, the Afghanistan, which is how we refer to it. This was in August 2021. To me, that was me seeing him as a performer, right? So he is so used to acting like he is someone who he's not. He's so used to acting like when he was president, he was the president. He would say things that weren't true to make himself seem more important. And I'm sure you saw that working for him.
Always.
And
He
I think
always
that's,
exaggerated things, you know. He did say something very human to me, though, which I will share with you. It was my first day on the job. I had finished my press conference. I walked back from lower press up into the Oval Office, and I was standing there, and he looked at me, and there's this beautiful plaster of Paris seal on the ceiling of the Oval Office of the president, you know, the presidential seal. And he looked up at it, and he looked at me. He goes, "Can you believe we're doing this here in the Oval Office?" And then he said something that was actually really funny. He goes, "You know, you like action, and I like action. You can't believe the action that you get here." It was just very it was very New York, and it was very. And I was looking at him like, "Yeah, I like action, but this is serious. I mean, this is it. This is a big job here. We got to help the American people, you know."
But to him, it's all a TV set.
Yes,
right? It's all a movie set.
He wasn't thinking about it that way. He was like thinking about, okay,
Yeah.
how's my photo op going to look today? Am I going to look okay? Is this going to look right? Is that? He wasn't thinking about, you know what I mean? I'm sad about it. I want to, I mean, honestly, I don't dislike the guy. Everyone says I must dislike. I don't dislike the guy. I'm sad about what he is and what the culture has become to connect him into the most important job that we have in our country, if not the world. So I'm just a little sad about it. And your book is so insightful because it provides a perspective of how this happened in our culture and how this happened in our society. And so,
are you also sad about him being in this situation which he clearly can't navigate? Because you're right, he is. It's enjoyable sometimes spending time with him. It's funny. He says interesting things. He goes on long tangents, but he's not boring. But do you feel that he's in this situation that he clearly can't navigate on his own? And so
listen, he's going to get destroyed by this guy, J.D. Vance. Okay. He's going to get destroyed. First of all, J.D. Vance is a lot smarter than him. He's not as experienced, but he's a lot smarter than him. J.D. Vance is like uber ambitious. And when Trump realizes how smart Vance is, remember that blonde woman he knocked off The Apprentice after season 2 because she was getting too much attention?
Yeah.
He's going to give J.D. Vance one of those cartoon punches in the head where he gets knocked off the screen. You follow again, metaphorically, but that's him. Look, he's never going to be able to tolerate a guy like J.D. Vance that actually knows the difference between a Shia and a Sunni, knows what the Sykes-Picot Treaty is that set up the Middle East after World War I. He's going to freak out.
I predicted that he's going to try to fire J.D. Vance within a year if he becomes president, which technically he can't do. But I agree with you. I don't think
Vance is now on the ballot with him, but he will disgrace, besmirch, and berate J.D. Vance. If he wins the presidency, he will disgrace, besmirch, and degrade J.D. Vance. I guarantee, because he won't be able to handle the guy's personality. And Vance is a very ambitious guy, So,
and I think he selected Vance because it was good casting, right? Because Mike Pence was older, and he wanted someone who was younger, and he was thinking about it in terms, again, everything is in casting. He talked a lot about casting, central casting, how he picked people.
Well, they showed him pictures of Vance in different fashion statements, and he hates beards, by the way. He's like George Steinbrenner, but he's accepted that younger people, like his sons, wear beards, but he doesn't like them. You know what I mean? So he's very clear about that. He's like this George Steinbrenner figure that way. Step back for a second, though. Talk about last night's speech. It was very long, but it was subdued. It was a little humble. He was almost shot and killed, and that would have been a horrific story for America. Thank the Lord that did not happen. God forbid. But he was wounded, and he was close enough to death. A head turn, a re-guidance, and a readjustment of the wind by the sniper, and we would be in a totally different and, in my mind, tragic debacle of a situation. But he seemed very humble and subdued last night. What's your reaction to that?
I thought the first act of his speech when he came out, and he was part of the being subdued, I think, is also part of him being a performer. So he realizes, given that the entire country is now feeling sympathetic towards him, we are all grateful that, you know, he's with us. Tragedy didn't happen at the campaign event last weekend. So I think part of it was performative, right? He was playing into that. And I thought the first half of the speech, or the first third of the speech, was very effective and very powerful when he was recounting what happened and thinking that by the grace of God, he was with us, and the statements that he was making and the tone of his speech was very effective. And he's a very good storyteller when he wants to be. But the problem with the speech was that it wouldn't end. And the second half of it, or the second 2/3 of it, felt like he went back to being the Trump that we remember from the previous time he was in the White House, where he rambled. He was giving us his lines about immigrants invading the United States, illegal immigrants invading the United States. He didn't really have any policy that he was presenting to the American people, other than broad things like, we're going to stop inflation, we're going to help the auto industry. Like, these were just buzzwords that he was using, but clearly he doesn't have a plan to do all the things that he was talking about. And I think that what we saw was that all the energy and all the momentum that he had, and the convention for the most part was a very effective convention, kind of drained out of the room. And so when we got to the end, it was like watching a season of a show that needed to maybe be canceled. It went on for too long. He had no point of view. He had no argument. He had no appeal to why he wants to be president again. Why does he want to be president again? That's a question that people often ask me. And it's because of the fame, because he wants to be in the spotlight. He wants people to talk about him. So I actually found it to be not as effective as I thought it would be watching the first half. And the other thing I thought about and realized was that if Joe Biden had not been in such a bad state during the debate, the real Donald Trump would have come out. We didn't see the real Donald Trump during the debate, right? Trump came into the debate, saw that Joe Biden was in a bad place, and just kind of stepped back and let Joe Biden take one of the rare times where he didn't want to take the spotlight, right? He could see that Joe Biden was not doing well. And so we allowed Joe Biden to not do well in front of the American people. But we didn't see the real Trump at the debate, and we started to see the real Donald Trump last night at the convention. And I think this is important for Democrats because there's this sense that this is inevitable and Donald Trump's going to be president again, but it's not. And I think the American people need to be reminded of what it was like under his presidency.
You think Joe Biden stays in the race? And again, of course, we're talking when there's some speculation that he's leaving. It's just your thoughts.
I think that clearly Joe Biden doesn't want to leave the race. He wants to stay in the race. He thinks there's a path for him to succeed, but I do think it's looking like he's going to maybe step aside and let someone else run against Donald Trump.
Can Kamala Harris beat Joe Biden? I mean, Donald Trump. Can Kamala Harris beat Donald Trump?
I think that the thing about Kamala Harris coming in and trying to beat Donald Trump is that Donald Trump is going to be energized by having a new opponent. And so I think they're going to have a very strong message as to the dangers that Donald Trump represents. And I think the problem that Joe Biden has right now is that there isn't strong messaging.
No, he can't advocate. He can't get off the prompter, so he can't advocate. He's actually got a great legislative agenda. The economy's booming. The stock market's at an all-time high. Employment data is improving. There's so many great things going on for the president, but he can't get out there, rebut the nonsense and lies coming out of Trump's mouth, and he can't advocate for what he's doing. So it's, it just makes me worry. I do think Trump's going to lose, by the way. That's just my personal opinion, because I really think that there's a majority of people, even in those swing states, sensible people that don't want to return to the hysteria, even though they may enjoy some of it from a talking at the water cooler sense. I don't think that they want to go through it again, but we'll have to see. Let's talk about some of the revelations in this book. It's a phenomenal book, Ramin.
Thank you.
I got to go back and read some of the other things that you've written now as a result of reading this, but you're talking about watching The Apprentice with Donald Trump. You also mentioned that he starts out with a $25,000 per episode salary. He wants to get paid like the Friends stars. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of his salary. Talk about his reaction watching The Apprentice with you.
So I think people have to remember when Donald Trump started on The Apprentice, this was in 2004, he was doing things like doing cameos on The Nanny or The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He was showing up in Home Alone. He was known, but he wasn't known in the way that he was known as a result of reality TV. And so Mark Burnett was a very successful producer at the time. Survivor was the biggest show in America, and he wanted to do essentially a version of Survivor set in New York City, which he considered a dangerous jungle, but a different jungle because it was the city of New York and it was a tough place. And he wanted a business leader to represent what the highest apex of business. And he came up with the idea of pitching this show to Donald Trump. Donald Trump agreed without even consulting with his agent, who's also Regis Philbin's agent. And they agreed to $25,000 an episode. And when the show blew up and became huge and millions of people were watching, Trump went to Jeff Zucker and said, I want to be making what the entire cast of Friends are making. And at the time, each friend was making $1 million an episode. So Donald Trump asked for $6 million an episode, which is a ridiculous amount of money for a reality TV star, even now. And they got into a fight and a back and forth. But he continued on. He obviously didn't get that much money. But what was so groundbreaking about the show was that Mark Burnett structured the deal so that Trump and Burnett got all the product placement revenue on the show. Because back then they didn't know how much money that was really worth. So every week there was a new challenge and there was a new sponsor, and they would come in, a car company, a toy company, a fashion brand, and they would give that money straight to Donald Trump and Mark Burnett. And that is why there was so much product placement on the show, because they really packed the show with as much advertisers as they could, because they were really running two businesses. It was a reality show, but it was also essentially an advertising agency. And that is how Donald Trump made a lot of money that he made while he was on the show.
I have a lot of respect for you because you write objectively and say, and so tell us why Burnett casts Trump.
Burnett was looking for someone that could be a business leader, play a business leader, be brash, be over the top. You have to remember back then it was like Simon Cowell on American Idol, right? He was mean, but he was so mean that people liked him. And Donald Trump also had a similar quality where he could improvise in the boardroom. He didn't seem to care. He was who he was. He was this tough New Yorker. And it really worked on reality TV. And going back and working on this book, I went back and rewatched many of the seasons of the show. And the show is still very entertaining. Donald Trump is very good on the show. He is a good reality star. We do have to give him credit for what he's good at. He's a very good reality star. He's good at reacting in the moment, saying funny things, captivating people's attention. And he also has this fatherly figure that he can project when he wants to make people like him and feel like, okay, he's invested in these underlings. They're trying to be the next Apprentice. And all of that was very effective. And Burnett tried to do it with Martha Stewart. There was a Martha Stewart spinoff. It didn't work. They tried to do it after Trump became president with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It didn't work. So what Donald Trump did on The Apprentice wasn't the easiest thing in the world. And he was very fixated on the failures of Martha Stewart and Arnold Schwarzenegger. But again, these are different skills than running the country.
So, but you point out in the book that this is literally his crowning achievement, right? Because he inherits a lot of money. He has some success with Trump Tower. He generally has bad success in business. He fails with the the airlines. He fails in the casino business. Most of the things he touches goes wrong. He knows this, which is why he has a lot of internal self-hatred. But he is an attention seeker, and he has enough fame where Burnett says, hey, this guy's going to propel my show. You know, when I met with Mark Burnett, I asked him why he casted Trump. He said there was no other business leader out there that had written a few books that had some level of notoriety as a result of the fame that Donald Trump was seeking. And so, I give Burnett a lot of credit, frankly, for casting him because he was, perfectly casted in that show. And by the way, okay, he was a fun guy back in the day, Ramin, to hang out with. I'm never going to besmirch that. Okay, when I used to hang out with him, he had a good sense of humor. There's a garrulousness to him. He's even charming to the people that he lights up on Twitter. He's a little nervous that way. He doesn't like confrontation. So if he's confronting somebody over the mouse or the clicks on the board, he can do it, but he doesn't like it in his face. Have you experienced that as well?
I think he has this Bill Clinton quality where he has this if he wants to turn it on, he can be very charismatic. He can seem like he's very invested in you. He can talk about anything. He can talk to anyone. Um, and yes, I noticed that he was always calculating and doing the mental math about who to go after. If someone had not gone after him, he would go easy on them in his stories to me. But if someone had gone after him, or he felt like he had a score to settle, or he thought that, okay, I can use this feud that I'm creating to get more headlines and attention, then he says the things that he says, and it's all strategic. He's playing a publicity game.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Some of it, he's not even that. Yeah.
No, you're right. But listen, he started coming at me on Twitter. I guess he must have thought I was Ted Cruz. Once I started demolishing him on Twitter, he went into complete retreat because
back down. Yeah.
He didn't like it. You know, I was calling him the fattest president since William Howard Taft. I think I said he was tiny Trump after meeting with Stormy Daniels. We understand where all the insecurity comes from. I mean, I was hitting him, you know, in a way that he's not used to. And so he immediately went into retreat because all it was doing was creating negative publicity. You know, he hates the negative publicity. People think Donald Trump believes that all publicity is good publicity. It's not. He hates negative publicity. So, all right. Well, you listen. The book is awesome. What do you think happens? What is Trump's legacy?
I think his legacy is that he is America's first reality TV president. He is clearly a product of this reality TV, digital Instagram age in which everyone wants to be famous for the sake of being famous. And I think that it represented a turning point in our culture when he became president. It was a very scary time in America when he became president during COVID. And I think he is the influencer president, if that makes sense, right? We are in the age of influencers, and he is the influencer president, the first influencer president that we had.
Okay, I'm down to the part of the podcast where we have our 5 famous words. I'm going to read you the words. You're going to react, okay? And they're all culled from your book, okay? You ready?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. The View, as in the television show, The View.
So Donald Trump was obsessed with The View. He watched The View. He got into a fight with Rosie O'Donnell. And it was a place where he went to talk about The Apprentice a lot, and also teased his candidacy in 2012, which he obviously didn't run then. But he was a huge fan of the show, and Barbara Walters.
Yeah, and he was on it a lot, and Barbara Walters liked him, you know, and they got on, Barbara Walters and him. I don't know if she would have liked him as president, but she did get on with him. He, you know, Regis liked him, you know, and Regis was a good guy. I don't know if you remember Regis, and I had a great relationship with him. Mark Burnett.
Mark Burnett is the ultimate reality power player. And I think one of the reasons why he's not speaking publicly about Trump, he wants to stay in Trump's good graces, but he also wants Hollywood to like him and accept him. And so he's been in this very strange place in the last few years. But he's the reason why Donald Trump is president of the United States.
He is. And I like Mark. I got along with Mark. Mark is a very, very smart guy. We'll have to see where things go from here. The Apprentice.
I think The Apprentice is the most influential TV show in the history of the United States. I think it created Donald Trump, is the reason why Donald Trump is president. We talked about this. Eric Trump agreed that it set the template for the campaign for the entire family. And if he had not starred on the show, Donald Trump even told me that he may not have ever run for president, which was his way of acknowledging that he wouldn't have been president without the show.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you the second most important show. You ready?
Yeah.
You hear the second most important show?
Yeah.
General Electric Theater. You're going to say, what the hell do I mean by that? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do. But why is that the second most important show?
Because Ronald Reagan was the host of General Electric Theater.
Oh, right.
He was seen in everybody's living room. And this
Yeah.
is when there was only a couple of television stations, and the
Yeah.
ratings were massive. And so when he went to run for governor in California, everybody knew who he was as a result of General Electric Theater, which was a show hosted by Ronald Reagan in the 1950s.
I think that TV, we can't underestimate how important TV is
Even
in getting
today
people.
with all the podcasts and
Yeah.
all this, the TV is a big medium, particularly for older people.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're down to the last two. The boardroom. I say the boardroom. You say what?
I say, I mean, I don't even know how to say it in a quick way because it was Donald Trump's safe space, right? It was where he felt the most powerful. He felt like he was king there.
Right. Really, really true. And he was great in that setting. You know, look, you have to be honest about this shit. Donald Trump. That's my last one. Donald Trump. I say Donald Trump. You say what?
Exhausting. I think that, and that's the key for the Democrats, right? We have to remind people that this is a show that people don't want to watch anymore. They think they want to watch it because they're bored right now with Biden in the White House, and everything is calm. But we don't need another season of the Trump show. We really don't, and we may not survive it. That's the thing that's so scary, and that's what everyone's message needs to be as we look ahead to November.
I see sadness. I know this sounds crazy, but I think that it's a compilation of sadness. Also, he doesn't look well. Last night's speech, I know the guy a long time. That bullet that grazed him is hurting him psychologically, and it's also, I think it's affected him from a stress point of view, and you wouldn't wish that on anybody. Ramin, what's next for Donald Trump? Does he win this election?
In reporting this book, it did feel like there was a very good chance he could win the election. And I think a lot will depend on what the Democrats do, if Biden remains the nominee, if there's a different nominee. But I think that there's clearly a path for Donald Trump to take the White House back. And I think that's very alarming and scary. And no one thought that was possible 4 years ago. And I think we have to understand and explore why that's possible. And I think it's really, really key, because I wrote this book in the broadest way possible so that people could understand Donald Trump. But in talking about Donald Trump, and if the Democrats are really wanting to challenge Donald Trump, they have to speak a language that appeals to Americans throughout the country.
Well, it's a phenomenal book, and I could interview you for hours. Unfortunately, I have a time segment on this damn thing. Pronounce your last name again for me, if you don't mind.
Setoodeh.
Okay.
Setoodeh.
So the title of the book is Apprentice in Wonderland: How Donald Trump and Mark Burnett Took America Through the Looking Glass, written by Ramin Setoodeh. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was an incredible conversation.
Thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.